By the end of this video, you'll understand why the FedEx that shows up at your door for a next-day envelope and the FedEx that shows up with your online order are, for most of the company's history, two completely separate businesses that only merged into one network in 2024. Why a package that looks bigger than it is empty air inside can cost you more to ship than one that's smaller but denser. A pricing method that has nothing to do with how much your package actually weighs. Why the biggest logistics company in the world, a German conglomerate with more global reach than FedEx itself, spent $10 billion trying to break into the US domestic delivery market and walked away having captured almost nothing. And why FedEx is currently in the middle of quietly splitting itself into two separate companies, unwinding a business it spent decades building. That failed $10 billion invasion is the story we're building to, because it explains something almost nobody outside logistics understands. The thing that makes FedEx so hard to compete with was never really about planes or trucks. It's about a kind of infrastructure advantage that takes decades to build and that money alone can't buy quickly. Let's get into how this actually works. For most of FedEx's modern history, FedEx wasn't really one delivery network. It was two, run separately, competing for some of the same customers internally. FedEx Express, the original business, built around overnight air delivery, used FedEx's own pilots, planes, and company employees. FedEx Ground, added in 1998 when FedEx acquired a company called RPS, used a completely different model. Independent contractors driving their own routes under FedEx branding, optimized for cheaper, slower ground shipments, rather than urgent air freight. For over 2 decades, these ran as separate operating companies, with separate sales teams, separate systems, and separate profit and loss statements, even though a customer just saw one brand on the truck. That changed starting in June 2024, when FedEx folded FedEx Ground and FedEx Services into a single integrated air-ground network, one that finally sells, prices, and routes as one operation instead of two competing internal fiefdoms. FedEx has said the consolidation, part of a broader cost-cutting effort called Drive, is meant to save billions of dollars a year by eliminating the redundancy of running what were effectively two national delivery companies inside one corporate shell. For fiscal year 2025, that newly combined Federal Express segment generated $75.3 billion in revenue. The overwhelming majority of FedEx's total $87.7 billion for the year, with the much smaller freight trucking division making up the rest. Here's the part of the business that most people never think about. Your package almost never travels in a straight line from sender to recipient, and that inefficiency is actually the entire point. FedEx built its business around a hub-and-spoke model, centered on a massive sorting facility in Memphis, Tennessee, that operates through the night, every night. A package headed from one city to a city 3 hours away by road might still fly to Memphis first, get sorted alongside hundreds of thousands of other packages, and fly back out toward its actual destination, because routing everything through a small number of central hubs, rather than trying to run direct point-to-point routes between every possible pair of cities, is dramatically cheaper at scale. It's the same logic behind airline hub systems, and it's why building this kind of network from scratch is so brutally expensive. You're not just buying trucks and planes, you're building the sorting infrastructure, technology, and route density that only pays for itself once you're moving an enormous volume of packages every single night. If you're enjoying this breakdown, hit subscribe. We go inside a different industry's real numbers every episode. Here's a pricing mechanism that quietly generates significant revenue and that most customers only discover the first time it costs them money. Dimensional weight pricing. FedEx doesn't just charge based on how much your package weighs. It calculates a dimensional weight, the package's length times width times height, divided by a standard industry divisor, and charges whichever number is higher, the actual weight or the dimensional weight. A large, lightweight box, the kind of thing you get when a small item ships in an oversized package with a lot of empty air inside, can end up billed as if it weighs far more than it does, purely because of the space it occupies on a truck or plane. FedEx has adjusted this formula multiple times over the years, tightening the rounding rules as recently as 2025, and each adjustment tends to push more packages into higher-priced brackets. The logic isn't unreasonable. Airplane and truck cargo space is the actual scarce resource being sold, not just weight capacity. So a carrier that only charged by the pound would be effectively subsidizing anyone who ships bulky, low-density packages at the expense of everyone shipping dense ones. But it also means the sticker shock most customers feel isn't a billing error. It's a deliberate pricing structure built around the true constraint of the business: how much physical space fits on a plane. Here's the part of the industry that explains why FedEx and UPS have operated as a near duopoly in the US for decades, and it's the case study we teased at the top. In 2003, DHL, already the dominant express delivery company across most of the rest of the world, owned by the German postal conglomerate Deutsche Post, decided to make a serious push into the US domestic market. It acquired Airborne Express as a platform and spent the next 5 years building out ground hubs, sorting infrastructure, and delivery routes across the country, trying to establish itself as a genuine third option alongside FedEx and UPS. It failed completely. By 2008, after investing roughly $10 billion total, DHL had never risen above 4th place in US market share, behind FedEx, UPS, and even the US Postal Service. In November 2008, Deutsche Post announced it was shutting down DHL's entire US domestic air and ground operation, writing down close to $4 billion in restructuring costs and laying off nearly 15,000 American workers. DHL's own global CEO put it plainly at the time: the US was a highly concentrated duopoly, and DHL had never been able to build the route density needed to make the economics work, no matter how much capital it poured in. This is the lesson underneath the story. This isn't a business where a well-funded competitor can simply buy their way to relevance. A delivery network only becomes efficient once it's dense enough packages, on enough routes, funneling through enough hubs, to make the cost per package fall to a competitive level. Until you cross that density threshold, you're running an enormously expensive network at a fraction of its efficient capacity, losing money on every single shipment, while your two established competitors, who already crossed that threshold decades ago, keep getting cheaper and faster. DHL didn't lose because of bad execution. It lost because density, once someone else already has it, is almost impossible to outinvest. There's a structural risk in this business that's different from ordinary competition. Sometimes the company paying you the most is also quietly building the infrastructure to replace you. In 2019, FedEx allowed its air and ground delivery contracts with Amazon to expire rather than renew them, walking away from one of the largest e-commerce companies on Earth. At the time, FedEx said Amazon made up less than 1.3% of its total revenue, a small enough number that the decision wasn't really about losing volume. It was about Amazon simultaneously building out its own massive competing delivery network, complete with leased cargo jets and tens of thousands of contracted delivery vans, essentially replicating FedEx's own playbook, continuing to help move Amazon's packages while Amazon built the infrastructure to stop needing FedEx altogether, was, from FedEx's perspective, subsidizing its own future competitor. FedEx isn't just restructuring internally, it's in the process of separating entirely. In 2025, the company announced plans to spin off FedEx Freight, its less-than-truckload trucking division, into a fully independent, separately traded public company, a separation expected to complete around mid-2026. The logic mirrors the Network 2.0 consolidation, just in the opposite direction. FedEx Freight is a fundamentally different kind of business from parcel delivery: bigger shipments, different customers, different competitive dynamics, and running it inside the same corporate structure as the parcel network was diluting both the parcel business's efficiency gains and the trucking business's ability to be valued and run on its own terms. It's the same underlying idea driving Network 2.0. Businesses that don't share the same operational logic perform better apart, even when they've historically shared a logo. At the scale FedEx operates, margins are thin but volume is enormous. Federal Express segment operating margins have hovered in the mid-single digits in recent years, meaning the company makes only a few cents of profit on every dollar of revenue, but multiplied across tens of billions of packages a year, that adds up to billions in annual operating income. A small regional courier, by contrast, might serve a single metro area with a handful of vans, competing on personal relationships and same-day local service, rather than trying to match FedEx's national density, a fundamentally different business that survives by not competing on the same terms at all. FedEx isn't really in the business of moving boxes from one place to another. It's in the business of operating one of the most capital-intensive, density-dependent logistics networks ever built. One where the real competitive advantage isn't speed or service, it's decades of accumulated route density that a rival, no matter how well funded, cannot simply purchase their way into on any reasonable timeline. The overnight envelope was never the real product. The real product is the network underneath it, and as DHL found out the expensive way, that network is almost impossible to rebuild from scratch. If you want the deeper version of this, how businesses like this one are actually structured, priced, and scaled step by step, check the channel for more videos, and it's worth a look no matter which business you're most curious about. If this video helped you see the shipping industry a little differently, go ahead and like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching.